Cinderella Full Fairy Tale Audiobook. Once upon a time, in a faraway land, there lived a kind and gentle girl named Cinderella. She lived with her wicked stepmother and two stepsisters who were very mean to her. They made her do all the housework, from scrubbing the floors to cooking their meals. Even though they were unkind, Cinderella remained patient and never complained. Cinderella's stepsisters had fancy clothes and they always went to parties, but poor Cinderella had to stay at home, wearing old rags. One day, an invitation arrived from the king's palace. The king was having a grand ball for the prince, and every lady in the kingdom was invited, including Cinderella and her stepsisters. Cinderella's stepsisters were thrilled. They spent hours getting ready, putting on beautiful gowns and doing their hair. Cinderella wanted to go too, but her stepsisters just laughed at her and said, "You can't go to the ball looking like that." Cinderella was heartbroken. She cried and cried, wishing she could go to the ball. Suddenly, a bright light appeared and her fairy godmother stood before her. "Why are you crying, dear?" asked the fairy godmother. "I want to go to the ball, but I have nothing to wear," Cinderella replied. The fairy godmother smiled and said, "Don't worry, my dear. I'll help you." With a wave of her magic wand, she turned Cinderella's rags into the most beautiful gown anyone had ever seen. She also gave her glass slippers that sparkled like stars. Then, with another wave of the wand, the fairy godmother turned a pumpkin into a golden carriage and mice into horses to pull it. "Now off you go to the ball," the fairy godmother said. "But remember, the magic will only last until midnight. You must return home before the clock strikes 12. Cinderella thanked her fairy godmother and climbed into the carriage. When she arrived at the ball, everyone was amazed by her beauty, including the prince. He couldn't take his eyes off her and asked her to dance. Cinderella danced with the prince all night, feeling like the happiest girl in the world. But just as she was enjoying herself, the clock began to chime. It was midnight. Cinderella remembered her fairy godmother's warning and quickly ran out of the palace. As she ran, one of her glass slippers slipped off her foot, but she didn't have time to pick it up. She jumped into the carriage just as the magic wore off, and she was back in her old clothes, standing outside her house. The next day, the prince was determined to find the beautiful girl he had danced with. He searched the entire kingdom, carrying the glass slipper Cinderella had left behind. He knew that only the girl whose foot fit the slipper could be his true love. He visited every house, trying the slipper on every girl, but it didn't fit anyone. Finally, he arrived at Cinderella's house. Her stepsisters tried on the slipper, but their feet were much too big. Then Cinderella asked if she could try it on. The stepsisters laughed, but the prince said, "Of course." Cinderella slipped her foot into the glass slipper, and it fit perfectly. The prince smiled and knew that she was the one he had been looking for. He asked Cinderella to marry him, and she said yes. Cinderella and the prince lived happily ever after, and her kind heart was rewarded with the love and happiness she deserved. The end.